Hello and thanks for joining me today. My name is Jenny. I am from Jenny Card Designs. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it here with me. My YouTube channel contains content that is intended to share paper crafting, tutorials, and inspiration with all of you. I hope that you enjoy. In today's video, I'm going to be using this stamp set from Not Too Shabby. This is called the Woodland Buddies, and I'm going to be making a couple of card projects for you today with this stamp set. If you haven't seen my videos before, this is my template reference book, and I'll leave a link in the description down below where you can find all of these templates to download to create your very own reference book just like mine. So for today, I'm going to be creating a policy style envelope using my Gemvelope templates. So I have also the Slimline card measurements and the measurements on how to cut and score a Slimline card. So I've got a couple of pieces of green cardstock here, and these are 110-pound heavyweight cardstock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the card base. So on the 11-inch side, I'm going to cut this down to 7 inches. And you can save this other piece for another card project or cutting out word dies and such, but I'm not going to need that today. And then we're going to take this out of the way here, and we're going to pull in my reference book with all my measurements and my scoreboard. So I'm going to take, first of all, my Slimline card that I've got cut here. On the 7-inch side, I'm going to score at 3.5 inches. And I'll score it a few times just to make sure I get a good impression. And then I'm going to fold away from my score mark and use my bone folder to crease the fold. And we get a nice sharp crisp edge. And here we have our Slimline card. Okay, so we'll set this aside, and now let's work on the envelope. Okay, so taking my piece of cardstock, I'm going to put it in the corner of my scoreboard, and I'll score at my first measurement across the 8.5-inch side at 2.5 inches. And then I'll score on the second measurement at 6.5 inches. I'll rotate my cardstock one turn to the left, and then on the 11-inch side, I'll score at 1.5 inches, and then at 10 inches. And now following along the steps, in step number 3, we're going to cut off 4 corners on each side of this piece of cardstock. You'll see the red parts of the envelope reference guide, step number 3, shows you exactly where you'll need to cut off. So I just follow along the score marks. Sometimes I create a little bit of an angle cut to help close the flaps up. Don't make an angle cut on the envelope top flap, just on the sides where the envelope will fold in together, if that makes sense. You'll see in step number 4, I've got a little red outline where I sort of make an angle cut. So I combine steps 3 and 4 together and cut off my corners and create angle cuts at the same time, just to save some time. So once that's all done, this is what we should have. Your envelope should start to look something like this. And then we'll go ahead and burnish all of the folds, making sure that we have good sharp creases and that everything folds together and fits nicely. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start taping this together. So on this envelope, on one side, you'll have a larger flap, and we're going to add adhesive on the inside of that larger flap and on the bottom flap. We'll press everything together using the bone folder to make sure everything's adhered, and fold up the bottom to close the envelope. And here we go. Here's our envelope. I'm going to take a corner rounder, and I'll just chomp off those corners so we have a nice smooth rounded corner on our envelope. And then I've got a 3/8-inch circle punch, and people ask me about this punch all the time. This is just something I picked up from Michael's, and I just create a little half of a circle just to create a little finger notch so that it's easy to grab whatever's inside of the envelope. Then I've got this scrap piece of cardstock. I cut down a little piece, and I'm going to create an envelope liner. I'll round the corners on this as well so that it matches the inside of my envelope. And I'm going to add a little bit of adhesive to the top. And we want to make sure that that adhesive does not cross that folded line there. So just add a little bit to the top so that once it's adhered, the envelope can open and close freely. You'll need a little bit of movement there, so this is why I don't adhere down the inside of the pattern paper. I just adhere it to the top, and then it works out nicely. Okay, and then I'll just work in my fold, open and close that envelope until I get the pattern paper. You could score at this point, but I just like to work it in and it seems to be just fine. Okay, so there we go, looks good. And then I have one little scrap piece of paper left. I'm going to add some adhesive to that, and I'm going to glue that down to the front of my envelope just to tie everything together nicely to create a nice decorated envelope. It's simple, but a little stepped up. And I'll just trim off any of that excess, and then this envelope is complete. And I'm happy with the way that looks. Our slimline card will fit in here nicely. Okay, so that's it for the envelope. Let's set this aside and we'll move on to working on the card. Okay, I have a couple of pieces of white cardstock, one for the inside of my card and one for the outside. Now at this point, I wasn't quite sure where I was headed with this project, but it does come together in the end. So if you feel like it might be a little bit all over the place, just stick with me. I think you'll really enjoy the finished project. Okay, so I've got a circle die here, and I'm just sort of measuring to try to get that circle lined up. I want to create 3 windows on this panel. So I just use my pencil to sort of eyeball where it's going to land so that I can get all 3 circles right in the center of this panel. So I'm going to go ahead and use some painter's tape. This is frog tape. It's a low tack tape that I like to use for die cutting. It's pretty cheap. I just get it at my local hardware store, and it lasts for quite some time. So I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine, and I'll cut all 3 of these circles out. And again, like I said, this is just eyeballed. I tried to get it centered as best as I could, and I think I was happy with that. So now that I've got these circles die cut, I kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do here. Then I decided to take it up one more notch. So I'm going to cut a piece of acetate. I've got a piece here that I'm going to cut down to 4 inches by 9 inches. And then I'm going to take this panel here that I've got 3 circles cut out, and I'm going to center it on my acetate, and I'm going to use my card base to help me do that. So what I've done is I've just lined up my acetate. Actually, I think this acetate is 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. My mistake. So I'm just going to line that up against my card base, and I'm going to use my tape, and I'm going to tape everything down and sort of get that little window panel centered on my acetate. What I'd like to do is create a window panel in this acetate. So I'm going to take my dies and tape them over top, and I'm just going to slide them in just like a little puzzle. You'll feel them sort of snap into place. And then I'm going to tape it down. I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine 3 times for the same process. And I actually wrapped this piece in a piece of typing paper just to make sure that I didn't get any lines or anything on my acetate or ruin it or anything like that. So I run this through 3 times, and then I end up with acetate window with 3 circles cut out, and then I also have 3 acetate circles, and I'm going to save those circles for another card project later on in this video. And I'm going to take this acetate sheet, I'm going to line it up over top of this piece of cardstock. I'm going to use this as a stencil. So I'm going to tape everything up, get everything taped to my work surface, and I'm going to grab some Gina K Designs powder blue ink. And I've got an ink blending brush, and I'm just going to lightly ink up my brush, and I'm going to, just in a circular motion, apply some ink very lightly over top of these circles. And I really like the way it turns out. It's really pretty. So the next thing you can do to step this up is add some stencils. Add some stencils over top of your homemade stencil, and we can create a really cool look. Now, I don't end up using this panel because I felt like it looked like a little bit too much, almost like seashells. It's super pretty, but I don't think it's going to work for my woodland critters. So for now, I'm just going to set this aside and go work on something else, and we'll come back to this in just a moment. Okay, so I've got my mini Misty, I've got some of the critters from the stamp set, and I'm going to ink those up with Obsidian Amalgam ink. And this is a great ink for all different types of coloring mediums, including alcohol markers, watercolor, colored pencils, and Gamsol. So I'm just going to run through this coloring very quickly. I don't do anything fancy. I am not an expert by any means. I just play with my markers and try to create some shadows and shading and just sort of make my little images look fun and sort of realistic. So I'll play a little bit of music and I will catch you back on the other side.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting here. I got time, it's clear to see. From up here, the world seems small. We can sit together. It's so beautiful, you and me. We meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free.
Okay, so coloring is all done, and I even stamped my sentiment, hello, on my little wooden sign, and I fussy cut out these images. Now here's this panel that I just thought didn't fit well with those little critters, so I'm going to kind of have a do-over. So I'm going to grab another piece of cardstock, and I'm going to take my little acetate sheet and get everything taped up onto my work surface, and I'm going to use the exact same ink. I'm going to use the Gina K Designs powder blue ink, along with my blender brush, and I'm going to ink up a soft sky in the background. So once again, going in a circular motion, just filling in those circles with a very light brushing of ink. And then once I'm happy with the blend, I'm going to grab one of my own homemade stencils. I will link in the top right corner of this video where I show you how to make stencils just like this one. So I'm just going to lightly go over top of the stencil, and I'm going to create some little clouds in my background. So I just move the stencil around and flip it around and to create just a variation so that each cloud looks different. It doesn't look like the same thing over and over again. That's what I love about this stencil. You get so much versatility out of it. Okay, so once I'm happy with all three of my little windows and their little cloudy backgrounds, I am going to remove my acetate piece and move on to putting this card together. So once I put this panel to the back of my green cardstock, I felt like it needed something extra. So I just grabbed a piece of black cardstock to create a matte layer in behind this panel, and I think that did the trick. That sort of helped my clouds pop off that green background. So I adhered everything together, and then I adhered this panel to my card base, and now I'm going to start adhering my critters to my card. So I'm just going to use my tape runner for that. I'm just sort of going to figure out where I'm going to put all of my pieces. And I do this by just moving them around and sort of see where they look, where I think that it looks good. And then I'm just going to use my tape runner to adhere these down. I'm not going to use any dimension. I'm going to glue these right to my card base. And I think this is perfect. I like how the little critters sort of break out of the white space. I think it's very visually appealing in terms of design, and when you look at it, I think it looks really nice with parts of those images breaking out of the little circle. So once I got everything adhered to my card, I felt like my word hello was just a little bit lost. So I grabbed a white gel pen and I just sort of outlined those letters just to help them sort of pop off of that little piece of wood board. And I like the way that looks. So I'm happy with that, and now I'm going to take some embellishments. I'm going to add some sparkling sequins. This is a little mix from Tailored Expressions. It's got some white and clear and silver and all different sizes, and I just like how having that different variation of size and color really catches the light. So it picks up most of the color from the background, but just gives it that extra shine. So I just dot some wet glue scattered around my card, and then pick up the sequins with my Marvy jewel picker and set them down on top of those little dots of glue. And then that's going to be it for this card. This card is complete. Here's a look at our finished card with its coordinating envelope. I had fun making this card. Such a cute little bunch of critters. Alright, so that's it for this project. Moving along to project number 2. So the technique I'm going to use for this card is going to be the opposite of the stencil window that I used in the first one. I'm going to take a panel of cardstock and I'm going to tape that stencil over top of it. Now the purpose of this is to make sure that I get my circles lined up in the right space. So I've kept the negative die cut pieces from this stencil and I'm going to put a little bit of tape on that, and then I'm going to slip them into the parts of the stencil where they came from. So then it's going to create sort of like a mask. I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm creating a mask on this panel, and then I'm going to peel away my large background stencil that I've got here. We're not going to use that for this card project. So this is what I've got so far. So I've made sure that these are good and adhered down, and I've got a silicone craft mat, and I'm going to ink blend. I'm going to use some of my Tailored Expressions blending brushes and just a variety of different inks. I'm using some Gina K, some Hero Arts, and I'm just ink blending in a rainbow. And I'm holding down those die cut circles just in case so they don't shift around on me. And I'm starting with red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and creating a beautiful rainbow background. Once I've got all of my inks laid down, I do go back over with the blending brushes again just to help make a smooth transition between colors. So I go backwards and then I take a microfiber cloth and just wipe off any of the excess, wipe off my little stencil circles so that when I peel them up I don't get any ink on my hands. So we have this beautiful one-layer card that gives us a nice window and creates some dimension without having that bulk. So I really like the way that this looks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Woodland Buddies and some Gina K Designs Black Onyx ink, and I'm going to do some stamping. So I'll stamp my sentiment hello in the center circle, and then I'm going to stamp some butterflies and critters in and around my circle. And as I mentioned before, breaking out of the white space. I really like the way that this looks graphically. So all of these images came inside of the Woodland Buddies set, and I decided to add some butterfly trails. I took a black jelly roll pen and just created some dots to make it look like motion for my butterflies. So I thought that was pretty. So I went over that a couple of times, and I'm not going to color anything in because I want the color to come from the rainbow background. So I also love to add black cardstock to rainbow backgrounds. I think it really just helps it pop. So I've cut a slimline card base here. I've cut a piece of cardstock down to 8.5 inches by 7 inches, scored it at 3.5, and this is going to be my card base. And I'm going to adhere my panel down to the front of my card. First I'm going to trim it a little bit, and we get a nice layer. Now there are some leftover pieces that I'm going to save, and I'm going to use that for the inside of my card. There's this little strip here, and I thought that would look good on the inside of my card base. And then I'm going to grab a white piece of paper for the inside, and I'll stamp a couple of my critters on the inside of there just to tie everything together. And I like the way that looks. Super cute. So that's going to be it for this card. Here is a close-up look at our finished card project. And that is going to be it for today's video. So if you're interested in any of the products that I've shown in my video here today, you will find them listed in the description of this video, as well as a link to the Not Too Shabby store, where they carry a ton of neat products and their own line of stamps, as well as some of the stamp companies that we all know and love. So head on over there and check them out. And a huge shout out to Not Too Shabby for sponsoring my video today and providing me with the stamp sets to use in this video. Coming up on screen are a couple of videos I think you may enjoy. Have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!